Welcome to the Posture Dojo podcast. I'm Sam Miller and I'll be your host. We're here to transform postures. At 18, I was diagnosed with a 85-degree kyphoscoliosis and ineligible for surgery. Over many years, I ignored, I didn't go deeper into that process, and I paid the consequences. At 33, I started shutting down my digestion, my lymphatic system, and immune system. And it was in that moment that my healing journey began, on a journey of breath, of alignment, and of movement. And that brings me to where I am now, here today, after correcting my posture, increasing my height multiple inches, and achieving peak performance in my own life. And now, on this episode of the Posture Dojo, I'd like to introduce you to Sean, who is a well-varied and experienced instructor of various methods that I want to share with you and talk about breath as the foundation of what we're doing with our postures. Sean Pritchard is the CEO and founder of Habit, a wellness and peak performance company based in New Jersey that serves education systems, businesses, and sports programs. Through Sean's own struggles with his mental health 10 years ago in college, he came across meditation and it changed his life. From working in tech sales, coaching youth sports, and being a personal trainer, Sean has used his experience along with his trainings and certifications in wellness and performance to create his own methodology called the Habit Method. Sean, welcome to the podcast.
Sam, it's a true honor, man. Hopefully my C's and D over F sharps were supportive enough for your rad intro.
I appreciate the spontaneous introduction there on our first episode of the Posture Dojo. I think it's improvised. It is what it is. We just gotta get it done. And I think that's something that I like to embody in my life. I saw your profile and I wanted to speak to you. You've developed the Habit Method, which I assume has something to do with how we inhabit our body and our mind. Please explain what your methodology is and what you're bringing to the world.
Yeah, absolutely, Sam. And thanks again for having me on, buddy. I really appreciate it. And it's interesting, dude, because your story, the work that you do and how you support people came from your own suffering, right? From your own pain, your own struggles with scoliosis. And similar, my story and my mission has come from my own pain as well. So I struggled with depression and anxiety, and I went very deep, not only onto the physical sides of illness, but also into the mental sides and what you're doing on a daily basis, the habits that you have, the mindsets that you have, the stories that you tell yourself, your self-awareness, and all of those things culminate to our health. And so while I was in college, I was actually playing soccer in school when I was originally struggling with some mental challenges. I realized that the breath and meditation are so critical. It's so funny, man. And you probably know this with a lot of your work as well. If you want to understand something, rewind a few thousand years and you'll probably find a lot of answers. I think it was, maybe his name's, is it David Hancock? He talks about how we're a species with amnesia. Like we forget a lot of these truths. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing with the Habit Method is helping both, whether it's everyone from business executives to professional athletes to teachers and students, be able to use breathwork, mindfulness, things like visualization and goal setting, and other types of mindset training as a way to help them not only elevate their performance and be able to perform when it matters most, like I work with folks that are even MMA, like professional MMA fighters, but also just their general wellness and quality of life. And the foundation of that, in which, for your first episode, breathe your higher self, is the breath. I'm very, very keen on teaching as many people as I can how to properly breathe, because I truthfully believe that this is one of the missing links in our public health. So we take over 20,000 breaths a day, so critical to every cell, every function, our spinal stability, everything. And the vast majority of us, brother, are breathing from a dysregulated standpoint. So when I wake up every day and I open my eyes, I have purpose and I have just power inside of me and a reason to go out and help people, because the breath, truthfully, man, is the foundation of so many things.
Beautiful. And, before the episode, you wanted to give me a disclaimer that, you're not specialized in postural work, but I actually kind of want to counter that and suggest that you are. Although, now when it comes to this posture correction, I want to kind of share why I think that you actually are skilled in it, but maybe that's not the people that you're kind of focused on helping. It sounds like you're helping people like reach their peak performance in whatever, business or sport or career or personal arena they're in, right? Mm-hmm. But you mentioned in your story, right, depression and anxiety. And so in these postural deficiencies, when we have a structural collapse of our habitat, maybe it will look like a depression, right? We have this body that we're inflating with our breath, and when we're not inflating it completely, and that may be physical trauma, an emotional trauma, some type of childhood trauma that leads to this collapse, and it's often on the left side. There's theories that it's the collapse of the masculine or the feminine in through the parents. It can be through more of a physical thing. In my case, it was a near drowning accident that kind of cranked my leg in a river and jarred up my hips, and that lack of movement combined with, I guess, all of this kind of social anxiety stuff that we go through as we're trying to navigate the world, and we're all kind of just like this. Adding to that, I locked up the system, so my brain and spinal cord were tensed and locked up at the pelvis throughout my teenage growth spurt years, which caused this warping of the spine, because the vertebrae continued to grow, but I had a spinal cord that was locked up, and it created quite this kind of corkscrew warping. And in this, over the past 4 or 5 years, I've done a lot of different methodologies. I've combined all of them. The rotational angular breathing from the Schroth method is where we're starting to target our breath into our rib cage to basically de-rotate the curve that's happened, because the scoliosis is often a derotation of the rib cage block. It's about understanding the spine from the shoulder block, the rib cage block, and the pelvis block, and then using your breath on the inside as you create the space and the conditions externally with gymnastics or movements or positions to allow that corrective derotation to happen. So we're basically kind of activating that surgeon's hand we have inside of us with the breath to get that derotation of the rib block and correct as we go through there. So that skill has been helpful with the breath, but what I'm diving deeper into right now in my own process, and with a particular theory in the 70s by Dr. Roth, who identified that the scoliotic shape of the spine is coming from this tensed nervous system, which is not allowing the vertebrae to extend and grow and elongate completely. And physically it makes so much sense to me. In my own experience, it's making so much sense to me. And this idea that by relaxing the nervous system, allowing that spinal cord to let go, to release, and that might be combined with physical movement to help that those years of chronic tension be released. But I'm experiencing profound alignment and correction through just that, by trying less, by calming that nervous system, and often that's done through the breath. Right? I've had some profound healing and alignment, and I don't hear anyone talking about it in the space. So these skills that you've been developing, although not specifically related to posture, can really be applied to that. So that's definitely something I'd like to kind of dive in with you, and perhaps I share what I think I think maybe a few benchmarks of what I think like we can bring awareness to with breathing, and then we'll go from there to see like, you know, where can you take us into, let's go beyond that. So in terms
Sounds
of
great.
a benchmark awareness of our breath in general, we're breathing through our nose, we're breathing slower, we're taking less breaths, maybe I think 10 seconds for a complete breath, so 6 breaths a minute is a good idea to slow down our breaths. We're breathing deeper, we're breathing not just into our belly so that our belly is going in and out, but we're really breathing in this 360 degree expansion as low down as we can, so we can actually start kind of feeling our breath in our lower back a little bit. We're breathing slow and we're breathing through our nose. I mean, I think that's a good kind of benchmark breath. At least that's kind of what when I become aware of my breath, I kind of check those things to make sure I'm kind of going in that direction. Is that on point? What would you add to that? What would you take away from that?
Yeah, so I'm really glad we're talking about this, because there's one component of breath work that folks typically overlook, and that is the value of actually light breathing. And a lot of this work comes from Patrick McEwen. Have you heard of him before? So he wrote the book Oxygen, The Oxygen Advantage. He was one of the key partners in the book Breath with James Nestor. He's been in the breathwork space for about 25 or 30 years. He had really bad depression in the late 80s, early 90s, and then he realized that a lot of it was rooted in his breathing. So he's somebody that I've done his programming, I really look up to. And one of the things that he talks about, Sam, is that deep breaths, one of the things that people do is that they take in too much air, actually. And now, just to separate these two things for a second. So when you're taking those very deep breaths, especially what it sounds like too, when you are adding in things like angular rotational breathing, where you're really trying to expand all capacities, that's like a breathwork focused session on that. But for the typical, let's look at the habitual resting breathing pattern. Most humans have an oxygen saturation of around 95 to 99%. So we actually don't need more oxygen. What we actually need is better oxygen delivery into the cells. And this transpires through something called the Bohr effect. So one of the things that he talks about, and I've integrated into my programming as well, is the value of light breathing. And this is really focused on carbon dioxide. And it's interesting because, you know, for many, many years, people thought that carbon dioxide was this waste gas. You know, you bring in the good stuff and you exhale the bad stuff. Well, what happens is, especially when you look at people that are highly stressed, looking at people that are obese, people that have poor diets, they actually are over breathing. So they're taking in as much as 300% more air than they actually need. So one of the things that I help people to rewire is to train themselves to breathe on a lighter level. So the simple exercise of putting your finger below your nose, starting to feel what that air looks like, drawing in, feeling that coming into the body, and then cutting it perpetually by 50% until you can barely feel it. And Chris Pei, a Qigong and Tai Chi master, he talks about the 3 levels of breathing, which I really like. So the first level is, can you breathe so lightly that the people around you don't hear you breathe? So that's level 1. So the second level is, can you breathe so lightly that you yourself don't hear yourself breathe? And then the third level is, can you breathe so lightly and so softly that you can barely feel yourself breathe? So that's the final level of that type of light breathing. And now this is training us to breathe as light as possible, because what that's doing, again, Sam, is that efficiency gain that you get with more oxygen going into the cells. That's critical, because what happens is, what the Bohr effect tells us is that at higher levels of concentration of CO2, more oxygen can go into the cells. So the better that you can train the body to breathe at a lighter level, knowing that your breathing pattern is actually hardwired into your brain and nervous system, that being able to switch that from taking these very deep, big breaths to breathing lighter is critical for your stress levels, for your sleep, for even your overall movement too, because you're going to have better oxygenation of the cells.
I love how esoterically congruent this is. Like, this is making sense at like a profoundly deep level. It brought up a couple ideas. One of them, resistance creates resistance. If you're trying to breathe hard into an area, trying in itself is intending, your intention. And so this idea of light breathing, especially when it comes to these postural collapses, which create much more dense, tight part of the body, our natural breath, without intention, the path seems to go in the breath seems to go in the path of least resistance in the body. So if throughout our teenage years we develop, a tightness or a collapse on one side, our rib cage kind of closes on one side and it expands on the other. So the breath just ends up kind of following that river, just like a river would, like a stream of water would follow, the same path down the sand, right, or through the dirt. The river just kind of goes to where the path of least resistance is, and it seems like the breath operates the same way in the body. And when it comes to correcting the posture, and in particular the Schroth method, we're inflating the lungs and the rib cage in areas that we haven't inflated for many years because the breath hasn't been going there. And the way in is something that I like to call more of an infiltration. We're not. If we go in with force, we create this opposing force as well. And so it's really valuable what you've just shared there with the light breathing, because that is the way in. And it brought up a idea that's been kind of resonating, which is the universe doesn't want you to try harder. It just, the answer is accepting. The answer is always accepting. Resistance creates more resistance. Force creates an opposing force. The way in is allowing.
Yes.
So how, and it feels like work when you're breathing into these new areas and you're trying it. It's like, it's hard. It's uncomfortable. We haven't done it before. It feels impossible. So how can we allow? Talk to me about that allowing of that light breath.
And I think it comes from a familiarity of beginning to master your breath. Just from I always recommend people lie down that are new to breath work, putting one hand on their chest and one hand on their belly, and just starting to take those slow, light nasal breaths and feeling the diaphragm expand and be activated, and the belly expand rather, and the diaphragm be activated, and keeping that hand on your chest as still as you can, because the vast majority of people, Sam, like I mentioned, breathe from a dysregulated standpoint. So they're already with their breath being like, I don't even know whether it's through the nose, through the mouth. I don't even know if I'm using my chest or I'm using my leg to breathe. Like, I just am existing as a human with this kind of meat suit, just moving throughout like the universe. And the breath is just part of it. But we know how critical the breath is to master for all of these things, whether we're talking about performance, from a sports standpoint, we're talking about stretching and mobility and opening up the body. We're talking about self-awareness and visualization, mindset things. So it's like the breath is so foundational. So when I first start with people on the concept of just letting go and surrendering, which I love the way you articulated that, is first taking some time, even for 3 to 5 minutes, of lying down. And I have a video that I can actually share with your audience. It's a 7-minute video that's on slow, light nasal breathing with using the diaphragm, just as a baseline. Because once you start with that, you can actually feel where the breath is being derived from, and you're like, I see. Okay, so I feel my belly rising. I feel that the breath is being driven from the chest, because what science tells us is that most people, 1, they breathe through the mouth. And then 2, they breathe using the secondary muscles, breathing muscles, which is the upper chest, the shoulders, and the neck. and then they also take in too much air. So what's happening? So what this does is, especially with that mouth and secondary muscle activation, it tells the sympathetic nervous system, it's party time. Let's go. We want adrenaline. We want cortisol. We want stress. And the vast majority of people, Sam, are living in a low to high buzz of stress, having some type of sympathetic overdrive, and they're not even feeling that breath of where it's being derived from. So just bringing this back to your original point, if we're able to first start to feel the breath at a fundamental level in using the diaphragm, coming in through the nose, just having some breath awareness, when we get into these stretches, when we get into some of these mobility exercises, there is that ability to focus and feel the breath like a river flowing, through the body and where it's landing.
Beautiful. So that's an amazing first step for someone who wants to deepen their connection with their breath and start harnessing the innate power, the healing ability, the central nervous system regulation, all this good stuff, this laundry list of great stuff that comes from the breath. Great first step. I was just saying, lie down, hand on the chest, hand on the diaphragm, light nasal breathing, connect with just that basic operation.
Yes. And like you said, brother, 5 seconds in and out is I think as a baseline. I typically, what I'll do is I'll start with people at 4 in, 4 out, and then go to 5 and work up from there. I actually developed my own breathwork technique called the Habit Breathwork Technique, which has at the higher levels doing one breath a minute, 30 seconds in and out. Very, very slow, light nasal breathing. And I actually created the methodology by studying the animal kingdom. And if you look at life expectancy as it relates to the amount of breaths, like a mouse versus a whale, fascinating data there. Zoologists and pulmonologists theorize that breath actually has a very large impact on our metabolism. And so that's what I'm trying to do for people is to help them to breathe slower, lighter, using the nose, so that people can live not only ideally longer, but have better quality of life.
Beautiful. That is, if you want a long quality life, take long quality breaths.
Yes, dude.
So in postural deficiencies, scoliosis, kyphosis, imbalances higher up, whether it's forward neck, whatever it may be, our feet and our glutes can get put out of a job because we're twisted. So we kind of start tensioning maybe in our lower backs or our hamstrings to hold ourselves up. Add to that, this need to look good. Whether we're going to the pool or the beach and we want to suck in our belly, right? Because we don't want to show our belly, and that creates, it's a useful kind of core activation pose, but we hold it a lot. And I personally had to kind of work through that. When I started becoming aware of this diaphragmatic breathing, I realized I had a bunch of tension in my belly, part because of this posture, just part holding the belly in. My neutral or my default state was really dense and really kind of tightened up in that area. And so I've had to really retrain my mind and my breath to adopt that Buddha belly, that relaxed kind of diaphragmatic breathing. So is there, once someone has this kind of awareness of that, let's say that basic breath, and they start coming across different tensions, and what are the common tensions you've come across, or the people you help come across, and then maybe something in that realm as well? What do you do when you start coming across these limitations to this breath?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one, Sam, because it's we're social creatures. We're at the pool. It's Saturday, it's the pool party, and everyone is tightening. It's tightening the stomach because, God forbid, I get figured out that I don't have an 8-pack, whatever. It's just like, this is the way that humans operate. It's super interesting. But what it does is, to your point, brother, is that, it creates that tension. It creates that tension, and the body feels that. Every single cell feels that. It feels that bit of, whether it's insecurity or lack of worth Maybe there's something deeper there that is radiated throughout the body. So when I start working with people, I have them, and sometimes I'm working with, like, candidly, I'm working with like high school girls that, like, I maybe have like image, like they're focusing on their image, and getting them just to relax the belly and to know that around each other and we're in a safe space, and that's okay. So there's like a little bit of a shift of, like, society says that we must be tight and have self-worth because we need abs to be cool or whatever. And then it's like, no, we have to actually deconstruct that because we're all breathing incorrectly. And one of the things that I like to do is I love using just a simple cat-cow motion of with the breath, of being able to, as you inhale, rounding the spine, and then as you exhale, really dropping the belly and creating that flow and tension. And I also love adding in, which is really interesting with the body, is that if you go from the deep squat position and you breathe, the breath cannot be driven from the chest. It can only be driven from the diaphragm, which is really interesting. So when I spend not a lot of my day, but I constantly going down to the deep squat position. I had very tight hips and back issues for a long time. And when I went through my mobility course, I really learned about the value of some of these more animalistic primal moves, hanging, squatting, just getting back to basics. And what I saw with my mobility was incredible. So with the breathing side, just having people, and granted, everybody has their own where they're at in their own mobility journey. But if you do have access to a deep squat or a slight variation of the deep squat, going down there and just doing some slow, light nasal breaths and really feeling the belly expand. I find that because you don't need to use your hands, you can just close your eyes. It's so rad. You can just feel the belly expanding, feel that diaphragmatic activation. And then also with the cat-cow motion too, is helpful.
Love it. Yeah, and we always have the deep squat, right? There's no excuse to avoid that one. We can do that anywhere. If you're waiting in line, you can be that guy. And especially if you're spending time on the phone, when we have the phone, it's such a mobile device. It's literally mobile. So, the deep squat is a great one to get into if we're going to be on the phone. It also allows us to kind of hold the phone at a better height for that head to create a more aligned posture as well. Mm-hmm. So yes, I also love the deep squat, integrating that as much as possible. In the scoliosis community, there's a lot of don't do these kind of cat-cow or hyper-extension or hyper-flexion because it's already compromised. Personally, I think they're not something we want to be going into, like try to push our limits and push ourselves into this new ranges of motion. We're not trying to kind of push ourselves in those directions, but I do believe it is very valuable to feel those ranges of motion. And, combining, as you were saying, the breath with that motion into those ranges of motion. It's not needing to, overdo it and over push it, but feeling that we have that kind of flexion and extension is something that I think a lot of people with scoliosis are being they're told not to do it, so they never do it, and they never feel that extension or flexion in the spine. And that I think if we don't use it, we lose it. And I've noticed that in my own body, places that I didn't go. I just thought I'm just not good at, I just don't have hip flexibility, so I never tried to really kind of go into that range of motion with my hips. And that just over years compounded more and more tension in those areas. So when it comes to cat-cow, I do believe it's worth doing and feeling and understanding. We're not trying to push or overdo. We're just going in there and feeling, okay, what happens when I relax and feel that flexion and extension as I move between the two. And this process of just going there and being with it has allowed me to get to a muscle up. Like I've actually just gotten a muscle up after years of kind of unfolding and working
Epic.
out. Like I've had to release tensions and build the proper activations to get this proper, activation when my body needs it with the muscles that it needs to get that power driven through the body. So
yeah.
stuff works, and it, as you said, begins with awareness.
Yes, it does. And just to piggyback that, Sam, is using, just from a training standpoint, just the simple motion of a push-up. Inhaling on the eccentric movement, so you're lowering yourself down, and exhaling as you push away. The breath is like this gateway that can be used in training a lot, like with whether you're stretching, you're going deeper into the stretch, being able to exhale through that. Like that concept of being able to calm your CNS, your central nervous system, and relax the muscles around and start to sync up the breath with movement. One, it's not only a greater lift in terms of your performance and experience of training, but it also just helps with just how you feel in the motion. You're just more comfortable. You're more in control. And I notice this a lot too. Like, for example, if you watch, have you ever seen somebody, or maybe experienced yourself, a hyperventilation before?
Sure.
Yep. Okay. So
yeah.
Very, very common, like especially with kids, like they start to go panic attack. It's real, man. Yeah. It's real. I've had them myself. It's super intense. So you're going in and out through the mouth, just the you're going very quick, and the breath, that is what's telling the nervous system to crank up and to go. So, and it's very primal, right? This is like as ancient as it gets. So what is the way to be able to manipulate the system and to help you? And it's to use the breath as the gateway. And one of the things I wanted to mention, just back to something I was talking about earlier in the pod, was that your breath is hardwired into your brain and nervous system. People don't fully grasp this, so I want to just dive into this a little bit deeper. So we take 22,000 breaths every day, around 8 million breaths a year. And every single breath that you take, Sam, is further hardwiring your breathing to be a certain way. So what people think about with breath work a lot is, oh, I use breath work to help me to de-stress. Valuable, 100%. Like, I think that there's a lot of value that when I feel stressed, I pull the emergency brake to help me to de-stress. So one of the very, very popular techniques that's out right now, it came out in the 30s, but Dr. Andrew Huben has popularized it. It's called the physiological sigh. Yes, exactly. So it's great. Very, very effective for in real time for reducing stress. But what about the rest of the time? So this is where a lot of my work and training programs come into, is looking at the habitual resting breathing pattern. Because if you are able to reduce your baseline stress because you have, for example, elevated your tolerance to CO2, so you don't have to exhale as much. You have trained yourself to have larger lung capacity. You have trained yourself to be able to breathe more comfortably through the nose, breathing slower. Your baseline stress is going to be so much lower. So it's almost like this idea of you can continue to pull the emergency brake, but if you want real cosmic change, you have to address two things, in my personal opinion. The first one is the habitual breathing pattern, so the resting breathing pattern, training for that. And then you have to train what's known as intermittent hypoxic training. So this is breath hold practices. These are stuff like Tumo, the Wim Hof method, which I'm sure that you're familiar with. My technique falls into that bucket as well. And that really is so huge, not only for the second one, intermittent hypoxic training, for the CO2 tolerance, because if you've ever used an oximeter and held your breath after, for example, if you're doing deep breathing and then you hold your breath, you'll see that your O2 levels plummet. And what happens then? Then your CO2 levels rise. Very key. But the biggest thing about this, Sam, and actually a study came out recently that showed that people that do IHT live on average 7 years longer. And the reason why is because what's happening at the mitochondria. The mitochondria is the key. So through hormesis or through hermetic stress, when the mitochondria is absent of oxygen, it causes it not only to grow, but new research shows that little mitochondria actually are growing as well. So that allows us to produce more energy, better process our stress and anxiety, and just feel in more wellness and be in a state of well-being. So the combination of those two things are typically how I approach my breathing methodology, depending on who I'm working with and where they're at in their journey. But it's not just I'm stressed and I pull to then not feel stressed. It's much deeper than that of how you can use the breath to train in these other modalities.
Beautiful. Now give me the explain it like I'm five version of what you just said. Because you got a little technical, but now give me the TikTok version.
The TikTok version. Okay. The TikTok version is you have your resting breathing pattern that needs to be trained by breathing lightly, slowly, through the nose, and using the diaphragm. Okay? That needs to be trained on a consistent basis. Then you have breath hold practices that should be trained on a consistent basis too, which helps you to have more energy so that you can feel your best.
Beautiful. Okay. So
how is that dumbed down version?
Well, like the mitochondria and how that's adding to the longevity. So I mean,
yes.
I mean, when we talked about long quality life comes from long quality breaths. I mean that training is allowing you to have higher quality breaths. Is that one way to put it?
Yeah, you're allowing you to have higher quality breaths and higher quality function of the mitochondria so that you can produce more energy. The energy production is a key component of this. So you get better mitochondrial health and function by having better habitual breathing, but when you do the breath hold practice, that really helps to create hormesis, which is the hermetic stress, which causes positive adaptations to have the mitochondria grow so that it can produce more energy. Yeah, those are the two. Hopefully that wasn't too complicated, but those and was clear enough.
Mitochondria and hermetic stress. We may be explaining those.
Yeah, so hermetic stress or hormesis, think of that as putting the body under stress so that there can be positive adaptations and growth. So we're talking about heavy lifting, cold exposure. That's a huge one. Putting the body into these states that are beneficial to cause it to grow, which is very, very ingrained into the human story and physiology. It's like, you go out, you do your muscle ups, you're breaking down muscle, you're putting stress on the body so that it can grow. And it's very interesting because if you look at what is one of the lowest lifts that somebody can do, especially if they are obese, for example, like if someone is obese to morbidly obese, getting them to start to go out and run is going to be incredibly difficult. So one of the things that's very helpful is first baseline is start to master your breathing, because a lot of the times with folks that are obese, they are over breathing, which is offloading too much carbon dioxide, which is changing the pH level of their blood, making it more acidic, which has a whole host of other health issues as well. So the breath, again, I'm so glad that you chose this for your first topic, because I truly believe it's so foundational to so many things.
It seems like every realm of human endeavor can benefit with long quality, slow, light breaths. If we're climbing Everest, if we're in a cold plunge, but if we're running or walking, if we're having intercourse, if we're public speaking, if we are focusing on work, if we are on the bus, it appears that long, slow, quality, light breaths makes life better and increases our performance.
It does. You're spot on. And I just want to talk about one thing you brought up with just relationships. It's very interesting. So I have a partner, a girlfriend that lives up in Boston, and one of the things that we do, not even just on not looking at the intercourse side, but just as a way to connect. Like if we have a day, we work, we're stressed, we're come back together, and being able to have your partner and lay with them and sync your breathing 5 seconds in and out, whether that person's laying on top of you and your diaphragms are flushed, or even just side by side. There is nothing, in my experience of being in relationships and looking at whether you go out, you have a glass of wine, you go on a walk together, there is nothing in my personal experience, and I may be biased because breath is my practice, that helps me to connect with my partner and down regulate our mutual nervous systems and align our energies faster than doing 2 to 3 minutes of this type of breathing together. It's so, so powerful. So for folks listening to this with your partner, take some time, one on your own, first to practice a little bit of your breathing, and then coming together and sync your breathing and see how in moments of when you start to fight, there's tension, you're feeling a little bit uneasy, finance stuff, life is just intense. Taking a few minutes, breathing, and then meeting that conversation with a more open heart and an open mind and seeing how it works.
That is the key to a happy, healthy relationship, I think, is delaying that instinctual reaction by creating this barrier with the breath. So, if you're running a marathon, great, that slow breathing is going to help. But when something in a relationship, which is very personal, very intimate, very, very deep, and that is going to potentially trigger a reaction, the breath really is that key to creating that space, that calm, that peace, to allow that reaction to pass and perhaps choose a better reaction, which is going to create a healthier and happier relationship as well.
Spot on, man.
Yeah, so that's key. Sean, thank you for inspiring us to become aware of our breath and tap in to these abilities that we have to inhabit our bodies in better ways. Inspiring does come from that word, in spirit, and I think if you get into the metaphysics of it, we are more breath than body in some ways. So the way we're breathing and the way we inhabit is super key. It seems like you help people go from that basic habitual breathing to getting into more of these optimal high performance methods as well, where we're going to the next level. Talk me through a little bit about that, what offerings you have in that realm, and where they can get in contact with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sam, thank you so much again, brother, for having me on. This has been a blast. And just the format of exploration and not having a bunch of preset topics and we can just jam. I love this. So thank you again. So my website is inhabitmindbody.com. And on the breathing side, I offer a 10-week breathing reset program for better wellness and performance. And that's a combination of live sessions with me and also training videos that are to be done daily within the app. And the main thing is that if you're looking for better sleep, lower stress and anxiety, better energy levels, reach out to me. I would love to see if I can help you. And then there are also areas that I help folks in on the business side. If you have a business, if you have a team that are interested in wellness, whether workshops or programs to help with employee wellness, that's a big area of focus of mine. And just a whole host of other areas in the education space too, helping teachers and students. So just reach out to me, connect with me on Instagram. I'm always down to just have conversations around all things wellness and performance. This is my passion and I love connecting with people.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Thank you for sharing. It's never too late to learn how to breathe. And it's good to have a guide and a mentor in that realm to kind of fast track you to the good stuff and give you the exact kind of techniques to get in there. So appreciate it, and I also enjoyed kind of collaborating and exploring the topic with you.
Absolutely. Sam, thank you so much again, brother. And I appreciate your work and how you're helping people to live happy, healthy lives with better just spinal health and just overall posture, man. I mean, I had a friend of mine had scoliosis, and watching what he went through was very challenging. So you're doing great work, brother. I respect and support you.
Love it. Thank you. I hope I'm helping you on your journey as well to help millions of people breathe better. So thank you for tuning in. If you've enjoyed this podcast, let us know. Leave a review for the podcast. Till next time, we'll see you on the next one. Have a good one.